This is Standard Office Procedures, the podcast that helps professionals live and grow through culture, communication, and candor. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Standard Office Procedures podcast. I'm your host, Grace, and with me always is Shannon. What? Yeah, with me always is Shannon.
Yeah.
Say hi, Shannon.
Hey.
Shannon and I are in rare form today. We're a little spicy. There's been some stuff going on in our personal lives that and at work that have impacted us. So excuse us if we seem a little bit ratcheted up. We're just passionate about today's topic, which is delegation.
You know, I am passionate about delegation.
I'm passionate about it in theory, but I'm not very good at it in practice. So if you're like me and you're somebody who loves the idea of delegation, but maybe when push comes to shove, you're for some reason just having trouble letting go or knowing when to let go or to what degree, boy, have we got some advice for you.
We have good advice that we try to take.
That is a fact. So today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of delegation and share some strategies to help you improve these delegation skills. So first of all, let's kind of define delegation. So the term delegation of authority really refers to dividing tasks and decision-making responsibilities among your team, right? So if you're maybe if you're an entrepreneur or a small business, maybe it's just you and you're getting a lot of good business and you're feeling overwhelmed. That's one way you can start delegating is by outsourcing some stuff. Or maybe if you work in a more traditional team, you're a manager or you're somebody who works on a team and is in a position of authority, and you're noticing that you just have a lot of work to do and you're not able to get it all done. And you're like, wow, I wish I had some help or I wish I had more time. Delegation might be the answer for you. I wish
sharing the workload.
You would write a delegation song for
I'm
us.
going to write a delegation
like a little jingle.
song.
I think you should. So let's talk about the pros and cons of delegation. And I'm going to go ahead and preface this by saying there are a lot more pros than cons. I always like to eat my vegetables before my dessert. So we're going to start with the cons. Some of the cons of delegating is that it involves time, right? So delegating tasks often involves mentoring and coaching, which takes some time. You think of it as like a short-term investment for long-term gains, but it does take a little bit more time on the front end. If you're used to just sort of tearing through your tasks, you know how to do them, you're efficient. Having to train somebody else to do these tasks will take a little bit of bandwidth.
And it may take that person a little longer to get through it until they get up to speed.
Exactly, up to your standard.
One thing we've talked a lot about is how planning and training and learning seems a little counterintuitive at times because we have to stop work to do those things.
Yep.
And so when you're delegating, you have to stop work to train somebody else or to plan out who's going to take what pieces. And that can seem, that can take some time, right?
Yeah, it might feel like your productivity is taking a hit, which it might be, right? But again, short-term pay for long-term gains. In that same vein, the quality of your work may suffer a little bit. So, or a lot bit, depending. But I wouldn't worry about that too much. I would honestly go into delegating expecting this, right? That way it becomes less of a scare when it happens. Because if you're training somebody to do something that maybe they haven't done before or they haven't done often, and you've been doing this for years or a long time or whatever it is, you're going to be more skilled at it than they are. So just anticipate that there might be a bit of a dip in quality, but they'll get up to speed.
It's all fixable.
It's all fixable. You can delegate authority, not responsibility. So again, remember that as you delegate, you may be delegating to a team member or a subordinate, but most likely you are still ultimately responsible for the outcome, for the success or failure of the project, which again can be kind of a scary concept for those of us who may have some control issues.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Myself and Shannon included, where we want to make sure that everything's perfect and you want to do it yourself and you're like, oh, I'll just do it. I understand that deeply, I really do, but you're really only hurting yourself. You get into your own way when you're preventing somebody else from learning.
Absolutely.
You also may run into this con that employees may not want more responsibility.
Well, we all got to do things we don't want to do.
I was going to say, if you're running into the problem with delegation where it's like, but I just don't want to do that, that might be a culture problem or something slightly different. But yes, you might get a little bit of pushback there. And then, of course, there's always the possibility that handing somebody some more authority may cause them to misuse it, which I mean, that's kind of a performance issue, but that's a potential, right? A potential con. So we've gotten those out of the way. Let's talk about all the pros.
I feel like a lot of these are cons that are either A, solvable through time because they will get better, or B, you have bigger cultural problems.
100%. If you have employees who you're trying to delegate things to them and they're like, no, I don't want to do that. That is a cultural issue. If this is happening across the board, or if you have
Or a
one
training
person,
issue, maybe.
or a training issue, or just like a resources issue,
Yeah.
right? Which again, like if you're trying to delegate and you don't have, there are no resources, no time, no budget to train people on things, and you're like, I don't know how to do this effectively, that's a bigger conversation. So there are obviously outside factors that can impact how effectively you can delegate, but we're going to speak about this in a bubble where you have all the resources that you need in theory. So let's talk about some of the pros. So workplace trust, communication, and team morale are all boosted by delegation. If you think about it, people generally like to work and do a good job. And it can be difficult when you're being micromanaged or you feel like you're being underutilized. So giving team members more responsibility will oftentimes have the effect of boosting morale, making people feel more useful and more included. Again, employee confidence, creativity, and innovation all generally increase when you give people, I mean, it's a pretty dark phrase, but giving people rope, right?
Yeah.
It's what are they going to do with
giving
it?
people bandwidth, giving people guardrails with a lot of space in between.
There you go. So giving people the opportunity to innovate more and try more and produce more gives them the chance to grow into these roles. Accountability is generally enhanced throughout the workplace. So when you give people more tasks and you give them clarity on what's expected of them, generally they have this idea,
When people take ownership over, do you want to start back?
No, I want you to do it.
When people take ownership over tasks and feel like they have ownership over, maybe it's a project or a single thing, and they're allowed to have a little creativity and flexibility, it's not how they get it done, it's that they get it done. And so if they get to kind of invent ways of getting it done, does that make sense?
That does make sense.
They
Yeah,
take
it ties
a little
back in with the creativity piece.
It's creativity and ownership. I feel like, and that just naturally increases accountability. Like if I own something, I'm going to feel accountable for it. Yep. And then I know I'm accountable to you as well. So I think it all kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah, which in turn increases fulfillment, right? Employee fulfillment, which these are all, again, pros, which leads to retention, right? Better retention, employee retention, if they feel like they're being utilized to the fullness of their potential and also being kind of pushed and empowered to grow and expand and develop new skills. Another pro, they're more likely to stick around. Micromanagement is reduced. I mean, nobody generally likes a micromanager. And in my experience, and I say this because I have done this before as a manager, I'm like, let me just do it. Or like, I'm going to help you, quote unquote, I'm going to teach you how to do it, but you're going to do it exactly my way.
Right.
And I've had to learn that like, that's not especially effective.
Well, I think there's a difference between telling somebody how to do something and delegating it to them. Delegating it to them, I feel like, is handing it over.
Yes.
I am literally handing you this box of stuff and you do with it what you want. I expect X at the end. Whereas micromanagement is like, here's the box of stuff. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to take this piece and do this piece and this piece and do this piece. And like, yikes.
Yeah.
That's micromanaging.
That is
That's
micromanaging.
not good.
And I'm
That's not
glad
delegation.
that you pointed out, here's what I expect at the end, right? Which again, we'll kind of touch on this in a minute, but that's so key here, which is you just made the distinction between micromanaging and delegating. And I think it all kind of hinges upon clarity of expectation, right?
Yeah.
We need X result. We want to, grow our following by 1,000%. That's a large percent. By 100% by the end of the year. It's up to you how you do it, right?
Yeah.
Here's how I've done it in the past. I wouldn't say just throw them out into the wind and say figure it out.
Yeah,
exactly. So here's how I've done it. Here's the infrastructure I've put into place to make it happen. You are welcome to use this, but you're welcome to, figure out your own ways to do things.
Spice it up a little
bit. So again, employees have the opportunity to grow and develop new skills. We kind of mentioned that a moment ago, but that's another major pro. And then the biggest pro of all this for you is that you as an owner or a team leader, you have more time to focus on higher level tasks or other tasks or building new things or whatever it may be. That's kind of the whole purpose of delegating, is to free up your time so that you can focus on other things.
Right. And I think that's, again, the beauty of like delegating versus micromanaging. If you're micromanaging, you're really not, maybe somebody else is actually doing the work, but you're hovering over them as they do it.
Yes.
You're not saving yourself any time or any emotional labor, right? You're doing all of it. But if you're actually delegating, you have freed up mental bandwidth to focus on other things.
The Standard Office Procedures podcast is presented by Blue Summit Supplies. We're an online office supply store that puts you at the forefront of our focus by offering new career-building resources every single week. Sign up for our newsletter and visit our blog at bluesummitsupplies.com for free downloads, tools, and tips to make your job easier and more fun. So let's talk about, just for a moment, what happens when you don't delegate. So I love this example. As always, we're basing this episode off of a blog post. And the example that our writer Jordan gives is when you have little kids. And I think a lot of our listeners are parents, or you guys have some experience with kids. But Shannon and I can both identify with this, is that like when I'm like cooking, right? My daughter, she's 8. She wants to help. And I'm like, no, sometimes I'll say yes, but mostly I say no because I'm like, I know it's going to take a long time to teach her. I know I'm going to have to make sure she doesn't cut her fingers off with a knife. I know she's, it's not going to do it.
It's not going to be
quite right. Yeah. And so there's all these reasons not to do it. And so I will admit that I generally am just like, no, don't worry about it. Thank you though. And I kind of send her off, and it bums her out because she's offered to help and she really wants to grow. And honestly, my job as her parent is to facilitate that growth. Right. Similarly, your job as a manager or a team lead or whatever it is, a boss, is to facilitate and oversee your employees' growth. Right. And especially if you have an employee who's like, hey, put me in, coach. I want to grow. I want to get better. I want to learn. If you're telling them like, no, because it's going to take time and effort off of your plate, that's not awesome.
No, that's
and
not right.
I do agree that like, yes, it is going to take more time to teach my daughter how to chop a bell pepper, than it would for me to just do it myself. It's probably not going to be chopped as finely as I would do it. There's a bunch of things that are going to go differently, not necessarily wrong, but that's how I make little independent adults. That's how you make people who are, well-rounded and growing and little helpful contributors to society. So if you don't delegate, all you're doing is kind of a disservice to those people who work with you.
Somebody, when I got married, way back in the yesteryear. It's like 15 years ago.
It wasn't that long.
But somebody said, let him do things wrong or he will never do them.
My mom told me the same thing.
Let him do things wrong. And so like I have let him do things wrong our entire marriage. And now I don't even think they're wrong. It's just, that's just how it's done. Like the dishes, like it's not how I would do it, but it's done, I
think about folding towels or folding t-shirts as this like prime example of that, where like my partner right now, he folds his stuff in a way that I think is dumb, quite frankly.
It's wrong.
It's not right. However,
it's done.
It hurts me 0% that, and all the clothes are folded and put away, and it's done. It's just like
the alternative,
and they're not wrinkly. Did you say alternative?
The alternative. The alternative. It's not done at all.
Yes.
Because you have too much to do, or you were doing it on top of all the other things you're doing, and you're stressing about it.
Yeah.
It's the same thing at work.
Yeah, or it's done poorly. Like just let somebody else do it. So anyway, delegating is key. So let's talk about how to be better at delegation. I am listening to this for me as well as we talk about it. So how to be better at delegation. So kind of the foundation of delegating is trust, right? So before you embark on your journey of delegation, when you're like, okay, I'm going to be a great boss, I'm going to be a great leader, I'm going to delegate and help and empower my employees. I love that for you. But let's talk about how you get there. Step 1 is trust. It's very difficult to delegate with confidence to people that you don't know very well. And I'm not saying, you don't trust them as in like you have reason to suspect them of, whatever, being dishonest. It's more that like you just don't know them very well. You
haven't had a chance to build that relationship to trust them.
Exactly.
Or even if it's somebody that you do know really well and you're giving them something new, like I trust that you can do these other 10 tasks just fine, but this one I've never seen you do before. So I don't have any trust that you're going to do it well.
And I don't know you very well. Yeah. Are you somebody who is a creative person? Are you somebody who's generally accountable? There's a bunch of factors that go into getting to know somebody and trusting them. So part of building trust is that you have to get to know people on your team and let them get to know you. I think that this is definitely one where I have struggled in the past when I manage people, is that I feel like I have this idea in my head of what a boss is. Like they're kind of like, removed, and they're a little bit not cold necessarily, but aloof, like they're busy and they disconnected, like, you don't want to bother them with whatever. And so I struggled with I wanted to be friends with my, my employees, but I wanted to be the boss. I wanted to make sure that I was recognized as having some semblance of authority. And I think that I kind of conflated, going back to the parent analogy, like, my mom used to say to me all the time, I'm not your friend, I'm your mom.
Right.
And I was like, why can't you be both? And she was like, I'm not here to be your friend, I'm here to be your mother. And so I guess I kind of thought of like, I'm not here to be your friend, I'm here to be your boss.
Right.
Here's the thing. Your employees are not your children. It's a very different relationship. You can be friends with the people that you work with, depending on your culture, of course. But generally, to start this culture of delegation and start getting better at it yourself and getting more comfortable with it, you're going to have to get to know your employees or your team on some kind of level that's beyond professional.
Some kind of familiarity and some kind of relationship with it. This is actually something we were talking about within our leadership team just a couple weeks ago, because we were talking about conflict resolution and how we could get better at it. And we were saying how some of us on the team are closer than others because we've worked together and we've had conversations and done things together, and other people we just don't know that well. And it's not that I don't have a problem with you. I just don't know you very well. So it's a lot harder for me
if I'm
to
in
bring
a room
things up.
with people, like with 7 of their, like you said, our leaders is a great example. Like if I'm in a room, I think there's 7 or 8 of us, and there's 8 of us and everyone's capable of doing a task, I know who I'm going to go to every time because I know Shannon the best.
I know what to expect.
Yeah, like I'm like, I know Shannon's going to get this done. And the reality is, like, all 7 other people are probably, no, they're not probably, they are just as efficient and intelligent
Just
and
as
capable. Yeah, but I just know Shannon, like I'm just going to go to Shannon. I'm doing them a disservice. And if you're in a similar boat where you're just like, I'll just do it myself, or I'll just go to the same person over and over again, and you're not giving the other people a chance, you're doing yourself a disservice as well as them. Yeah. So some ways that you can build trust these are pretty basic, is to engage in some team building activities. I'm not talking like doing what Michael Scott did in The Office, where you have to go and like step over hot coals. If you want to do that, hey man, that's your bag. Do what you got to do. But just simple things like taking your team out for lunch, or cheesy stuff like going
collaborating on lower
or
stakes projects. I feel like
There
it's
you
really
go.
good. It could be silly, like putting a puzzle together, or
Yes, there you go.
putting a puzzle together.
I heard you. I got what you
garbled all
said.
my words. So it could be something simple like that, or it could be something related to work, but that's fun, like a brainstorming activity. I think those are really cool ways of kind of having fun and everybody's relaxed, but you're collaborating with somebody, right? And so I think that's a good way. There's something, we talk about building trust through just like relationship building and bonding. But I also think there's a little bit to, if I have somebody on my team and I need to start delegating to them, maybe I'll start small, right? And I'll start delegating smaller things where if it gets done wrong, like it's not an irreversible decision. I'm not going to hand over the keys to the kingdom on day one.
Sure.
But like, here's this thing. If it goes wrong, like, we'll be able to sort that out. And then it's a training opportunity. But what you'll learn is you start to trust people over time because you know what to expect from them. And you start to learn their skills and you start to learn their weaknesses. And you can trust somebody even if they have a lot of weaknesses. It's not that you're trusting them to do things perfectly. It's that you're trusting that you know what to expect from them.
Beautifully said. And I'm glad that you mentioned failure, because that's another sort of piece of learning how to delegate properly, is kind of like we said a moment ago about having to let your husband or your spouse do things quote unquote wrong, is you have to let go. So as you delegate, you have to let go and you have to embrace the reality of failure.
Yeah.
So as people learn new things, they fail.
Yeah.
You think about babies learning how to walk. You fall a bajillion times. And then as adults, we can walk pretty well. So I feel like you have to not go into this expecting perfection. In fact, you have to expect failure.
Right.
And you have to make that clear. So I just feel like that's such a key part of all of this is, as you delegate, you need to create this place where failure is a part of the process. And, you have to be prepared for it. And obviously your team has to understand that it's okay for them to fail as long as they are growing and learning and doing their best, right?
Right, exactly.
Another way that you can get better at delegating is to, and again, this is harkening back to our example about washing dishes or cooking or whatever we said with kids. I don't know. That was 5 whole minutes ago. Is to teach instead of doing. So like Shannon said about micromanaging, you're not really delegating if you're just saying like, all right, I'm going to give you this project. Here's exactly how to do this. Now repeat this 1,000 times, or, follow this process exactly. What you want to do instead is teach. You want to take the time, you want to invest your knowledge and your skill set, and again, your time into teaching your team how to do this project or do this task, and then giving them the freedom to say, this is how I've done it historically. Now I want you to reach this goal, and if you can think of better ways to innovate, we are open to it.
I think I like the idea of coaching instead of teaching. I feel
good.
like
That's a better
teaching implies that I'm going to teach you how to do this one time, you go off and do it, and then there's an exam at the end,
Yeah, that's fair.
But I feel like coaching means I'm going to give you some guidelines, you're going to do it, and then we're going to check in along the way and have some feedback and some molding and some guiding going on. I think that is more effective than just, I'm going to teach you. And I think that's kind of what we meant by this, is like teaching along the way.
Sure.
It's not a teach one time, show you how to do it, and let you loose.
I redact the word teaching. I would like to say coaching instead. Thank you, Shannon, for this coachable moment. I'm glad that I have you in my life.
Coachable.
I mean that. Perfect. So another way that you can delegate better is to understand communication preferences. So this is kind of everything. Yeah.
I'm like shaking
Shannon
my hands.
just raised her hands in the air. So harkening back to building trust. Building trust is and engaging in these activities like team building activities. That all hinges on getting to know your team better. And getting to know them better helps you, know what to expect, all those things, but also it teaches you how to talk to them. And so when you start to delegate, it is imperative that you know your team at least a little bit deeper than a surface level, because certain people respond to things in different ways, right? I would say understanding how you delegate is just important as making the time to delegate. So if somebody comes up to my desk and is like, Grace, I need this by 4:00, and slams something on my desk and walks away, I'm not stoked to do that for you, to be quite frank. I don't want to anymore. You were super rude. However, that's not viewed as rude to other people. People who are very like time focused and, like I don't have time for small talk. If I can think of a couple people in our company that I'm not going to call out, but I feel like if I went up to them and I was like, hey, I need this by 2 p.m. Can you do this? And they'd be like, yes. I'd be like, okay, great. And I walked away. It would not be seen at all as rude. It would just be like, okay, great. Like you didn't waste my time. I appreciate that. Whereas I'm one of those people who it's like, generally I receive it better if you come to me and you're like, hey, Grace. And I'm like, hey, Shannon. And you're like, how was your dog? And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's so good. And you're like, that's great. Anyway, I need this project. Can you do this? And I'll be like, yes, of course, I would love to do that for you. So I'm not saying you need to be insincere. What I am saying is that it is kind of your job as the boss to know your team well enough to know how to communicate expectations to them. And I used a very surface level kind of thing there.
Right, because
really
there's
goes
a
deeper
lot
than
more
that.
to just giving something to somebody.
Yep.
I think this is a very cyclical thing where you are not going to learn how your teammate or how somebody that works with you or for you accepts direction until you give them some direction and see what they do with it. And then you can kind of tweak based on their successes and failures or shortcomings or, and it kind of goes in a cycle. So like maybe I actually learned a lot of this from Grace, because she's one of the first people that I really managed directly in such a high stakes kind of role. I mean, I've managed like
It was high stakes.
in like less, jobby kind of things, I guess. But anyway, so it was a lot of, okay, Grace, here's how we're going to do this. And then I would find out later, oh, Grace would do better if I could set some parameters for her. And then like, okay, here's some parameters. And it's like, oh, that's too much instruction, So Grace also likes some space for creativity. And so, and check-ins along the way and affirmation of like, this is good. And she does accept feedback, And so that's very helpful. And so that is important, because if I had never tried to start giving things to her and then saw where, because this isn't all on your employee. This is on you too.
Yeah, it's a team effort.
This is big time on you. Like there are going to be failures, and it is up to you as the responsible party to figure out how you can improve on those. And it goes a lot farther beyond, you did that wrong, do it this way instead.
Which is a very old-fashioned way of thinking of yourself as a boss. And again, like that, I fell into that trap. So I don't want to say, if you're doing this wrong, like shame on you. Like I've been there where I was like, well, my job is to make sure that, when she messes up, I say like, shame on you. Here's how we're going to do it better. And like, that's not effective or efficient. No. What Shannon just described in, like I've experienced it firsthand, and it was very helpful for me. And I grew a lot as a human being and as a, employee at this company through Shannon's management. But it took a lot of time. Yeah. That was a lot of time and patience and critical thinking, for Shannon to sit there and figure out like, all right, this didn't work, but this did work last week. So how can I, kind of coax? And for me, it is a lot of coaxing. Like I generally I don't like to be told what to do. And the more you tell me what to do, the more I resist it. And I don't like that about myself, but it's how it is. And I feel like Shannon identified that about me early on and has sort of, it's almost like you put on little gentle bumpers and you're like, I'm going to scoot you into the middle of the pasture instead of just shoving you.
Everybody really needs that.
I think so too, in some degree.
Some people really, I think they think that they want, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I think a lot of times, for some people, maybe that really is what they like.
The few outliers.
But I think a lot of people just have never been in a position where they felt like they were trusted and they had the bandwidth to make failures and not be perfect, you know? And so if that takes some coaching too, and learning communication preferences and giving them space. And like, some people want to be asked up front, hey, tell me how you're feeling about this. Other people, you're going to have to ask them 15 times and make sure they know it's okay to tell me what you think, So anyway, all that to say, I think it takes, like you said, it takes time to learn communication preferences, and it's up to you as the boss and as the subordinate to kind of come together on
It's
those
definitely a team effort. And, I will say though, as the manager, as the leader in the situation, if you're finding that the subordinate is not pulling their weight, it's on you. Right? Like kind of, I would almost say unfortunately, but that's the reality of the situation is that if you're trying to delegate and you're trying to figure out their communication preference and you're trying to work better with them and figure out how you gel and they're just not really giving you much, that's up to you.
You're missing something.
You're missing something, and it's, you can't just write off the employee as like, oh, I mean, I guess in some cases, yes.
I mean, honestly, if this is a path you're going down where we need like a performance improvement plan and you are ultimately not going to cut it, that's a whole different story.
That's a different issue, yeah.
But if you were just writing somebody off because like, well, they're just not doing what
or
I'm
this
asking
is
them
too
to do.
hard. Like, I think that's the biggest, this is taking too much time. And again, we're harkening back to that thing where it's like, this will take time.
And
this is not an easy thing.
improvements.
And cultural improvements are most likely going to be necessary as you start to delegate in a company where you historically don't have a record of delegation. That's, any kind of change is shaking, kind of shaking the foundation. So you have to make sure that you're prepared for the time investment that this will take, which will be hefty. Not super hefty, but it's not going to be nothing. So another way that you can make sure that delegation goes smoothly is to incentivize new responsibilities. So I want to kind of say this one last because it's kind of certainly important, but I think that it's less about how you delegate and more about what happens as you delegate.
Right.
So if you find that delegation is going smoothly and your employees are doing well, your team is doing well with it, and you're delegating more and more, and you're like, wow, this is going great. Oftentimes this happens in smaller companies. We kind of mentioned on entrepreneurs. I always mispronounce that word. Entrepreneurs at the beginning. We talked about how like, okay, maybe it was just a team of one and now there's more people and you're growing and that's awesome. If you find that suddenly your team, they're all doing like the jobs of 5 people, but you're still paying them what you were paying them before, they're not going to stay very long.
It's going to get really hard to delegate.
It's going to get really hard to delegate them because why are they there? There's no incentive, yeah, of course it feels great and fulfilling to do a good job and to be recognized for it. And, employee recognition does go a long way. Noticing that someone's doing a good job or working hard or, putting in the extra hours or whatever it is and saying, hey, I really appreciate you doing this. That does count for a lot. I know I really appreciate that when I feel like my team here is like, hey, Grace, we see you and we appreciate you.
Right.
That does matter. However, after a point where it's like, all right, I've gotten a lot of pats on the head, but I would love to be able to have more money.
Pay me and give me more resources.
And more resources. I'm so glad that you brought that up.
More tools.
Yes.
Make an investment in your people, both financially as far as their pay and financially as far as resources that they need, fancy softwares, whatever. Because if it is a time-saving operation, and we talked before about or maybe we didn't, but I know it was listed here about how delegating improves efficiency.
Yes.
But at 100%. A certain point, you're going to use up
all your
rope.
resources. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of it too, is that oftentimes I've seen this happen many a time where you'll have a manager and they're delegating, you have superstar employees who are just awesome and they do great and they take it all in and they run with it and they manage to, pull off all these extra tasks with aplomb. They're just doing great. But then after a point, it's like, what was I trying to say?
Well, maybe they start resisting.
They start resisting, or also they're they physically cannot do anymore. And you fall into the mental fallacy of being but this person always produces great on time. Why aren't they doing this now?
Why
I'm
is their work
disappointed in you.
suffering?
And if you are upset with that employee because they're not able to do yet another thing after you've delegated 6 things to them, that's not on them. They're one person with the same amount of hours in the day as they had at the very beginning. And now you've added, how many different tasks. So like Shannon said, yes, more money is great, but at a certain point, you can give them all the money in the world and they still can't produce anymore because they still have the same amount of time.
Right.
So resources.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Money's not going to buy more time unless you're talking about paying for help.
Well, yeah, which again would be resources.
I do want to touch on one thing too. When we're talking about recognizing people for doing a good job with their tasks. I think a lot of times bosses will hold back positive feedback because they're worried if they tell somebody they're doing a good job that they will rest on their laurels. And I've seen this happen before, but I think that is such a mistake.
If
you see somebody doing a good job, tell them they're doing a good job because the chances are it's going to motivate them to keep doing a good job and keep pleasing you. And so don't hold back on the positive feedback.
Nothing makes me want to work harder than when someone says, wow, I am impressed with you.
Right.
That was a good job, Grace. Good girl. That I'm like, heck yes. I'm going to do it 5 times better tomorrow. So again, if you're operating out of that mindset, that is outdated. You need to fix that.
It's 2022. Get on board.
It is going to be when we release this one.
I know.
Ooh, that's exciting. This has been a Blue Summit Supplies production. Good job, Larry.